You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
This past week, there was another mass shooting in the United States. A gunman walked into an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, and opened fire. He killed 21 people, 19 of them students. It's reignited the debate over gun control in the country. Texas Governor Greg Abbott defended his state's lax gun rules by pointing to Chicago as a reason that stricter gun laws don't work.
There are, quote, real gun laws in Chicago. There are, quote, real gun laws in New York. There are real gun laws in California. I hate to say this, but there are more people who were shot every weekend in Chicago than there are in schools in Texas.
We now welcome Senator Robert Peters from Chicago to the show. Senator Peters has championed a lot of gun reform legislation here in the Capitol in Springfield. Senator, thank you for joining us. I want to start here by getting your reaction to Greg Abbott's claims about the city of Chicago.
I think that the first thing I'll say is that Governor Abbott continues to fail his state and decided to lean on a long-standing right-wing American tradition of attacking either other cities, particularly northern Black cities, cities with large Black populations. This is something that we've seen in the 70s, when it comes to New York City, in the 80s with New York City and DC and LA and the Bay Area. He's just sort of continuing a longstanding tradition of deflecting from the fact that he's failed to keep people safe in Texas. The other one is to say that at the end of the day, no matter where you live, whether it's Chicago, whether it's in Texas, whether it's Indianapolis, which, by the way, ranks higher than Chicago when it comes to murders and gun violence, no matter where you live, you have the right to be able to feel safe. And the only way we're going to do that is not by having this state-by-state approach. We're going to do all we can as states, and Illinois is doing all we can about this. But fundamentally, we need a federal government approach, not focused specifically on individuals and individual action, but deeply looking at gun manufacturers who are making money hand over fist when it comes to violence. I want to make it very clear to people that we want to make sure that people, they understand that they have the right to bear arms. But large gun manufacturers, large corporations don't have rights to completely make profit off of these murders, whether it's Sandy Hook, Columbine, whether it's down in Texas, whether it's in the south side of Chicago, whether it's Indianapolis or St. Louis. No gun manufacturer and corporation has a right to continue to make money and profit off of this senseless, painful violence. Parents should not be concerned about sending their kids to school because of the actions of a young man who is acting extremely violent and dangerous and out of pocket, threatening their lives. That is something that we should be focused on instead of the dog whistle politics that Greg Abbott has decided to lean on to because he's failed his state and he continues to fail his state over and over again. Let's not just talk about gun violence when it comes to Greg Abbott across the board, whether it's the grid, whether it's the economy. When it comes to Greg Abbott, we're talking about a man who likes to swim in failure.
Senator, to be fair, Abbott is not the only one that is criticizing Chicago in this way. We had several debates earlier this week for the Republican candidates for governor, and they offered a lot of these same criticisms of the city. Now, when we're talking about advancements that Illinois can make with gun reform, do you think Illinois can go much further, or do you need that federal action that you discussed?
I think that we can always go further and continue to push the boundaries, particularly around some individual level. The other one is challenging. For example, it's very difficult to hold gun manufacturers liable because of a bill we passed in 2006. But I think that we got to continue just to push when it comes to gun violence at the state level. But I want to also address Darren Bailey, and I think address much of the sort of right-wing views that exist in parts of the Republican Party, or large parts of the Republican Party. Is the fact of the matter is, dumping on the city of Chicago is not going to make anybody safer, whether they live in Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, or the city of Chicago and Cook County. It's a fundamental excuse. It is built on a long-standing dog whistle tradition. And if you want to be governor of the state of Illinois, you have to be governor of the city of Chicago, the governor of Peoria, the governor of Bloomington, the governor of Carbondale, the governor of Champaign, the governor of so many other small towns that exist in the state of Illinois. And your job is to represent everybody. So dumping on a city and playing into the right-wing narratives and the dog whistle politics of the past isn't going to make things safer or better for anybody. This is just, again, a longstanding tradition, whether it's coming from some folks in the Republican primary here in Illinois, or whether it's coming from Governor Abbott, that has existed for decades. And just like public safety policy over the last few decades, it is built on failure. And so I'm disgusted and annoyed because I want to do whatever we can to make sure that people, no matter their zip code, no matter what part of the state they live in, no matter what part of the country they live in, have the safety, the dignity, and the life they deserve. And what we aren't going to do is build that on the backs of a dog whistle politics that has been failing us over and over again. And so I just want to make that clear. So I think that just needs to be said.
So far in this election cycle, we've heard from Democrats and progressives about this fear of the progress that you have made over the last 4 years could be reversed if Republicans are elected to office. We heard that a lot when the leaked draft on Roe v. Wade came out and all of the legislation that Democrats have passed on abortion so far. I wonder, we had this week at those same debates, every Republican candidate for governor say they want to get rid of the FOID card entirely. I wonder, do you fear that same sense of backtracking? You know, if the FOID card would go away, that same sort of backtracking could happen with gun reform legislation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to look at gun violence from a variety of different levels. There's clearly the fact that we have to invest in terms of of sort of everyday interpersonal violence, right? So we have the Reimagined Public Safety Act on that end. When it comes to getting rid of the FOID card and having someone just be able to walk in with any gun willy-nilly, we see an example of how the idea of a good person with a gun doesn't really exist. Because during that school shooting yesterday, the police knew this guy was about to go into this school, and they rightfully, I want to repeat that, rightfully were afraid of someone with such a powerful gun. They did not feel comfortable stepping into that situation, and a teacher did to protect her students. And so when I think about this, by allowing people to be able to roam freely with such violent machinery, there's no John McClane from, Die Hard stepping into that situation. What is going to happen is a painful tragedy. We cannot go back to that. There's always a risk with gun violence because of the fact that it's going to take to truly deal with this federal action. But we can mitigate as much as possible. We have to think about these things in multiple tracks. We have to think about these things in the complexity that exists here. And we have to act on those complexities, on those tensions, on honestly a series of contradictions, right? This gun violence issue is actually a national issue, but we live in a politics of deep federalism that has made this a state-by-state issue. And so someone in Indiana, or just like what happened when there was a gun runner coming up from Tennessee or a gun runner coming from Missouri, we're dealing with different crises at different times, and we have to make sure that we understand that there are different approaches to each. But what we don't need to do is go back to having extremely lax in terms of individualized gun laws. What we need to do is balance that with what really matters is going after these gun manufacturers and corporations making money hand over fist.
Senator, going back to that federal action that you've described, we've heard a range of responses from the Illinois delegation in D.C. so far this week. Most Republicans saying that gun reform legislation is not the answer. The answer lies in mental health resources or more security at school. What would your message to the Republican delegation be as they get ready to head back to D.C. next week?
I mean, I think first of all, everything they're saying is in fact political. And if anything, they make so many things political. Mary Miller, decided to participate in January 6th action. So I think she has no problem with extending her politics in the most violent way possible. And so what I would say to them is, I'm not here for thoughts and prayers. I don't think any of us are. I don't think any parent in any part of the state who's got the anxiety about sending their kid to school wants to see thoughts and prayers anymore. What they want to see is the large gun manufacturers, the large gun corporations who are trafficking in violence be held accountable for what's happening in this country. What they want to see is to make sure their kids able to enjoy their lunch peacefully. What they want to see is to make sure that their kid, as they're standing out their school, waiting to be picked up or waiting to go to a friend's house, is doing that in a safe and dignified fashion. What they want to see is to be able to remove the anxiety and the cloud that hangs over them each and every day when it comes to this violence. Done, ended, over. Ever since Columbine to Sandy Hook to, here now, we are basically in a repetitive sense of thoughts and prayers. The idea, though, is that God grants us will, right? We have free will. In that free will, we can act. I have a friend, she's a pastor. She posted basically criticizing Ted Cruz's obsession with saying thoughts and prayers because we actually have the will to act. And in this situation, we need to act to hold gun manufacturers and corporations accountable. And we need to act to make sure that we have a fundamental sense of safety for everybody, meaning a roof over their head, good health care, understanding that we have a collective responsibility to each other so that when someone in their teens, a young man, basically trafficking in sort of right-wing misogynist violence is going through those thoughts, that it is not happening in a place of isolation, that there is an interruption in place because we look out for each other. We have seen an uptick in antisocial behavior that has been very scary everywhere. This is happening everywhere. We see this when it comes to traffic violence, right? People driving and hitting people and hit and runs, that has been particularly painful. We've seen this in terms of political actions like we saw on January 6th. We have seen antisocial behavior across the board, and that is not going to end in a frictionless vacuum. We're going to have to deal with it head on. Again, when it comes to what's happening right now, we need to take different tracks, different strategies, and different approaches and be flexible in dealing with the multitude of crises we are seeing today. What won't happen is going back to the same old talking points, whether that's thoughts and prayers or dumping on a city, because that's not going to do anything for anybody. What that does is basically relieve these people who have serious power any responsibility to act. They want to be agents of failure year in and year out, and they want to blame a bunch of other people. This is our jobs and positions of power to fight back against a status quo that continues to fail people. It's failing young people. It's failing that grandmother who lost her life yesterday. It is failing people over and over again. And I would fundamentally say dumping on Chicago, whether that's Greg Abbott, Darren Bailey, or thoughts and prayers like the Republican delegation is not enough. What we need right now is a fundamental shift for how we're going to end violence and how we're going to do that in a collective national manner.
As this gun control debate has heated back up, the focus right now has been on how do you prevent the next Uvalde from happening? I wonder, when you're talking about solutions for that, do you think those same solutions would also offer help in the problems Chicago is seeing with gun violence right now?
I think first of all, it's important to remember that we are actually at a 30-year low when it comes to crime. And I think we need to statistically get that deep into people's heads here. We are actually at a 30-year low when it comes to crime. If people want to, they can go and check out in Illinois. ICEJA does this. I know that there's a lot of people talking about a spike in crime. We have seen an uptick in violence. That is true. We've seen this uptick in violence across the board, not only when it comes to gun violence in Chicago, but we've seen this in domestic violence. We've seen this with hit and runs. Those things are all seeing an uptick because of what I said earlier around antisocial behavior. But what I can say is that as long as gun manufacturers are able to profit off of violence, no matter what type of violence that is, that's a problem. What we need to do is continue to chip away at that and get to the point where we actually end this terrible sort of pandemic of gun violence. whether it's a school, and I think the idea is, and I want to bring this up. It is almost like it's always to try to compare what's happened in Chicago with what happened in Texas. And there are different approaches with different tactics and different approach. And we have to take, we have to see that you have to take different routes in order to deal with this problem. But what we see as a uniting factor in all areas of gun violence across the board is that someone is making money. And it ain't the person who today is freaked out about losing their guns, going out and buying it. They're not the one. It's the fact that there are people who are rich and they don't care about the working class. They want us to buy their guns and they don't care what we do with them. They need to be held accountable. I think of this truly as a 99% versus 1% issue. I think about the fact that Ken Griffin, let's name him, saw it to be a good investment when it came to investing in guns. I would like to know why he thought it was a good investment. What is he saying about gun manufacturers and gun corporations? Yeah, I want to have a conversation about the fact that there are people who invest in this violence who think that they can talk to us about what makes us safe. They don't care about making us safe. They care about making sure they can get a private jet or another yacht or to buy a soccer club. I think at the end of the day, I don't want those people buying a soccer club. I want people to be able to buy a home. And that's the shift we need to make.
Senator Peters, thank you so much for joining us this week. We'll be right back.